Tony?
I'm doing well, thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, I see you in the mountains there.
Do you? Oh, yes, a Merritt background, that's right. Yeah, we went, I was telling Sean and Linda earlier, we managed to get up to Kentucky Lake on Friday night for the night. We went and camped up there the night. It was very nice. Wasn't very crowded at all.
Really?
Yeah, it was awesome, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that Michael Ogwins is still on here, but I believe he's resigned now, hasn't he?
That's Manuel, correct there, Kurt?
No, it was
Yeah,
Ryan-
Manuel has resigned from
Ryan,
not
yeah.
necessarily from the committee, but he's from the Community Futures. So I don't anticipate there'll be a technical.
I will. Yeah, Ryan and Manuel won't be with us.
Found that you have to unmute yourself in order to talk. That also helps. Hi, Tony.
Hello? Yes. Yeah. Done
I
that
will.
once before.
Oh,
The good news is you found the button.
Yeah.
Don't push anybody's buttons.
Not tonight.
not looking very nice out there here. It's like nasty. Oh, jeez.
Nasty.
Except for your background there, Tony. Yours is gorgeous there. But here it's
Yes,
nice.
yes.
I've got a prediction. By the time I bike home, it is going to be crystal clear. And I'm saying this out of necessity.
So you're saying you want a really
Thank
long
you,
meeting,
Sean.
is what you're saying, right? Really long, like 5 hours. Got it.
Yeah,
had
we're
to
doing the
give our
mountain
new-
bike later
I had to
tonight.
give our new planner a hard time. She brought the Alberta weather with her, including the hail.
Oh, what? No.
So she started on Monday?
Yeah, on Monday. Yeah. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah. So I've got her into working on files already, and yeah,
Fantastic.
No wonder you're smiling from ear to ear.
absolutely.
Yeah.
First time you slept in a year. Who was the one that said they were doing mountain biking tonight?
Not me.
Not me.
Gary.
The other Sean, maybe, or?
No,
I thought I heard
Carrie
that.
is.
Oh yeah, Carrie.
Ah. I'm gonna send Margaret a note, see if she's making the meeting.
So has there been, Linda, a lot of individuals? I was hearing bits and pieces of names earlier on, but is there a number of individuals that have not even responded?
Yes, there's 1, 2, 3. There's at least 3 that are not here yet that didn't respond.
All right, do you want to wait a couple more minutes, or would you like to get, I'd really like more of the group here, especially with Dawn's presentation, right?
We are recording this as well, so anyone who wanted to view it will be able to view the recording, so nobody would be missing it.
Oh, good, okay, perfect. Yeah.
Here's Margaret Homer.
Margaret?
Yeah. Hi, Margaret.
Oh, hi. Sorry I'm late. I was in another meeting.
No, you're here, that's awesome. Thanks, Margaret. All right, well, it's 7 after, maybe we should get started, eh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome to our Economic Development Committee meeting, folks. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Sorry for the shift change, time change a little bit. We wanted to may have an opportunity to hear from Don, our Director of Planning, and he has some great ideas to maybe help us and as we work through with our individual work groups. So Don, thank you very much for joining us today. So the first item of business we have here, I've called this to order. The next thing is the adoptions of the minutes. Could I get a mover for the minutes, please? Last meeting. Bev, thank you. Second, Kurt, thank you. Is there any errors or omissions or comments about those last minutes? If not, I'll call a vote. All in favor? Oh, thank you. And none opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, so let's get right into it. I've asked Don to come to our meeting today to give us an overview of some of the planning challenges and some of the things that as we put our working groups together, especially with the Spirit Square, the downtown revitalization and the washroom thing, to give us some ideas and things to be thinking about as we go through that process and everything. Now I'm the chair of, Margaret, am I the chair of the washroom committee?
Oh, I think you're the chair of everything.
Yeah, right. Okay, I wasn't sure about that, but have we got the chairs for at least the chairs for the other two committees? Bev, are you the chair of one of the committees? Isla or Carrie?
Yes, I'm here, Isla.
Okay, Isla, are you chair of one of the committees? What the work group?
Pedestrian Mall on Colshana.
Oh, excellent. At least if we have the chairs, that's good. And then they can go back to their groups and disseminate the information we're going to get from Don today. Plus, Linda suggested as well, we're going to send out that presentation that Don will be doing to each of you as well. So you'll be able to go over it with your groups as well. So that would be really good. So Don, why don't you take it away for us? Thank you. Don, do you want us to hold questions till the end or as we go along? How would you like to do that?
If you have questions throughout, that's fine. I am going to try to run through the slides fairly quickly. Yeah, but I'm fine taking questions throughout the presentation if anyone has a pressing question. But I'll try to leave some time at the end as well.
Okay.
So I'm just going to share my screen here. So bear with me a moment. Okay. And everyone can see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So can I see it though? There we go. So city center revitalization is a bit of a complex beast. There's a lot of facets to it, from policy to participation to really just logistical items like infrastructure, et cetera. So I wanted to sort of highlight some of the things that would need to be put in place so that we could create a vibrant downtown. And of course, the subcommittees that have been set up are a part of that puzzle. So I'll give a bit of an overview on the revitalization process. So different things that we need to be putting into place so that we can have a revitalized downtown, a vibrant city center. I'll sort of highlight that these items can be done concurrently, a lot of them. So it's not sort of a step by step, but rather a sort of a group of things that we need to do to make sure that we can have the outcome that we're looking for. Pilot projects is something that I want to touch upon because they can be really helpful when we're talking about implementing specific projects like a pedestrian mall or a plaza improvement, downtown washrooms, these sorts of things. So, and then I have some steps that I've outlined for both staff and the committee. So with that, these are the items here that we're looking at. So 13 items. Just gonna move this to my other screen so I can see it better. Can everyone still see that? Okay. So right now we're already working on a number of these things. The official community plan, the ECDEV action plan we already have in place, but we need to update that. But there's a number of items here that we either haven't started or we need to spend a lot more effort on. So I'll sort of run through each of these a little bit. And you can see the bottom point there, improving spaces, Spirit Square, Quilchena, etc., is one of these items. So the OCP is a big one. So right now we're creating that high level policy framework that has economic development policies for the city as a whole, but also specifically for downtown revitalization. And once we have those high level policies in place, and we have, of course, a lot of input from the public and from council, we're able to then use those policies to direct the projects that we're working on and the action items that we want to move forward. So it's really, really important to have that in place. And we've been working on that now for the past year. We had webinars in October, also workshops in November. We're planning on having more engagement this summer when we have the draft plan ready. And we really would like more input from the business community. We did have some input in the fall, but it would be great if we had more businesses participate so that we can have a really strong sort of participation and a buy-in to the policies that are being created. And input can be provided to us at any time, planning@merit.ca. And of course, we have a dedicated OCP website. So that webpage has information on where we've come so far in that process. The next one is the Economic Development Action Plan. So that document was created about 5 years ago. Will, if you can give me a nod, I think about 2016.
Yes. 2014, 2015. So definitely needs to be updated there.
Yep. So it's one that we'll be working on, and we are planning to hire a COVID-19 economic recovery advisor. This is grant money that we got to help with that, and that person will be working on that plan along with the economic development manager when they're hired. We will need robust engagement from the business community, of course, to update that, and also from collaboration with business support organizations. So that's the Chamber, Community Futures, the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, NVIT, WorkBC, etc. So lots of partners that will help with that. And the ECDEV plan is for the city as a whole, right? It's our economic development strategy for the entire community, not just the city center. So on that note, it's always a good idea when you're talking about city center revitalization to have a specific plan for the downtown. And this is an action plan, right? So this would include things like revitalizing or improving Spirit Square. What's our plan for Quilchena Avenue? Do we want to do other items like patios? Do we want to create new spaces? Do we want to have festivals or events or programming? All of those types of items would be contained in a city center revitalization plan. So we don't have a budget, or we didn't budget for this for a consultant. So staff are hoping to be able to work on this in-house, but we will need to engage with downtown property owners, business owners, of course, the chamber, and then other stakeholders. That could include the Arts Council, community policing, food bank, et cetera, right? So basically anyone of the active user groups in the city center would be important in creating that plan. So that's something that's sort of on my project list to try to work on this year and into next year. So we're hoping to be able to engage with residents on that. And so that brings me to city buy-in. So right now, the city, I think we have bought into this, the idea of revitalizing the downtown. We are creating policy direction with these plans that I've mentioned. Staff capacity, obviously, we're looking to hire a new ECDEV manager to replace Will, as well, the economic recovery advisor. And we normally have summer students as well for community ambassadors. I don't know if we'll have staff capacity to oversee that right now, so that's a bit in flux at the moment for this summer. But normally we would have summer students to assist as well. There's also the financial planning. So when we're talking about our budgeting process, we did include certain things. Of course, we got some grant funding for BIA establishment. We have $100,000 in the budget that was a carryover that we can use on street furniture. So that's everything from bike racks to benches to street trees, whatever we can do to try to, improve the look of our downtown. So that's money that we would like to spend, hopefully sooner rather than later. Of course, the downtown washroom, we applied for a grant. We didn't get that, but we can, keep on looking for new grants and new opportunities. And then there's, of course, the grant in aid and in kind that the city does every year. And that can help in future years with things like potentially funding events or funding different things like the Arts Council came for $5,000 for the mural project. So these are types of things where the city can really help support this revitalization. And then, of course, the Economic Development Advisory Committee that has been established here, and that's a huge help as well, right? So I think from the city perspective, we definitely have that buy-in, and everyone is on the same page with this, that it's very, very important that we keep moving this forward. Property owner buy-in is another big piece of the puzzle, and there's twofold here. One is the landowners in downtown that are vacant properties. For them to be willing to develop those properties rather than just sitting on them as sort of a future investment, but actually let's get them developed now. Or if they're not willing to do that, to sell those properties to developers who will. The other side of it is the the building owners, their willingness to renovate those buildings. That we have quite a few buildings in downtown that are that could use some renos, right? That are in a bit of disrepair, and that's detracting some of the potential businesses that could move into some of those buildings. So if we had those building owners willing to renovate or to redevelop, right, as well. We do have zoning for 6-story buildings in downtown now. So if some of those building owners were willing to redevelop or to sell to other developers who are willing to do those things, that would also help revitalize our downtown. So getting property owner buy-in is going to be huge in moving our downtown forward. And I think a lot of the property owners are certainly on board, but we have some more work to do in this area. Business owner buy-in is also important. So engagement, I mentioned earlier that we had a number of business owners participate in the OCP sessions in the fall. We would love to have more business owners participate in these types of engagement processes so that we can make sure that we're getting that important feedback. If one business owner tells us of a certain issue, then it's something that's on our radar. But if 50 business owners tell us of that issue, then it becomes a really high priority, right? So if we get that feedback, then we're able to move on things that are, stumbling blocks or potentially items that are holding our downtown back, right? So we need to know those things. We need to hear about them. Operating hours is another one. In order to revitalize our downtown, especially our main street, Quilchena, we need to have businesses open evenings and weekends. So we need to get the right types of businesses on Quilchena that will be open on the weekends. I have a photo later on of Quilchena that I took this past weekend, and I'm sure everyone knows what it will look like, but it was a beautiful weekend afternoon, and it should have, our main street should be full of people, and maybe it wasn't quite that. So we've got a little ways to go. And part of that is that if businesses aren't open on the weekend, there's not a lot of incentive for people to be in downtown. And then BIA participation. So business improvement area, once that, once that were to be established, making sure that business owners are quite engaged with the BIA, volunteering for the BIA, and also any of the activities that the BIA is doing. So business owners really have to buy into the idea as well of having a vibrant downtown. This one is huge. So I mentioned about people, being in downtown. One of the ways to get people in downtown is if they live there. So we really need to create more housing. And from the city side, we don't build housing. So it's really just encouraging that. And there's different ways we can do that. One is to, of course, try to attract developers. Another is to encourage the property owners in downtown to develop housing. And there's also the zoning bylaw that we've already updated. Council adopted in September some pretty impressive changes for our downtown. So now we need to promote those, right? So I don't know that everyone yet knows of all of the things that's possible now, that you can do 6 stories in downtown. You can do mixed development where you have a mix of commercial and residential on the same property. These types of things. We also relax the parking regulations. So it's, the amount of parking that's required, vehicle parking is not as onerous as it used to be. So these are changes that really should help create housing specifically in our downtown, but we really have a lot of work to do about getting property owners and developers to then move forward with that. So this is going to be really important. We do, of course, have a building that's about to be under construction in downtown, a 44-unit seniors apartment building. So that's one building, but now we need another dozen of those down there. So we got to keep moving this forward as well. One of the items that is also potentially a stumbling block, but the development can actually help resolve this, is around infrastructure. We have a lot of old pipes in the ground, especially in our downtown. And so if you want to build housing as well as new businesses, new buildings for commercial, you need to make sure that you have the proper water and sanitary sewer, et cetera, in place. And so there's going to be some investment needed in that. Like I say, developers, if they're developing, they can help cover those costs, but there might also be city funds that need to be allocated. And Public Works and Development Services, we were actually meeting earlier today to start the process of a 5-year capital plan around some of these items. So we'll have a more solid plan moving forward on what items will be priorities, right? So that we can sort of allocate our funds accordingly and efficiently. Roads are part of that as well. So sidewalks, bike lanes, potentially upgrading crosswalks at certain intersections, curb extensions. So I'm thinking of places like at the post office, potentially having bump outs there so that pedestrians are more easily seen. If you create a more walkable downtown, people will want to walk downtown. So these are some of the items that actually help create that. Other infrastructure, lighting, benches, signs, bike racks. Bike racks is a huge one. If I want to bike downtown right now, there's not a lot of places where I can lock my bike up. And so if I don't have a bike rack in front of your store, I'm probably not coming into your store. So that's a really important one. And I mentioned the 5-year financial and capital plans. So we need to sort of try to prioritize funds for some of these types of projects in our city center. So that obviously will be subject of our budgeting sessions this fall. Yeah, Kurt, I think you have a question there.
Just a quick question with the walkability in the downtown core and so on. Our downtown core is fairly narrow streets and so on. Would looking at one-way streets help or hinder that process of making it more walkable?
Yeah, generally it hinders it. There are examples in the world where one-way streets have been implemented in a successful way. But generally, when you have one-way streets, it encourages drivers to drive faster because two-way streets, you have cars coming towards each other. And so psychologically, you actually slow down. So when you're going in one direction, even if it's just one lane, it's kind of like it encourages people to just go. So there's some psychological sort of aspects around that. If you design a one-way street, it's better to sort of meander it. So that it's not just a straight lane, but you sort of take some of the side parallel parking and sort of start the street there and then do that. And then, sort of that type of thing. There's lots of ways to design it, but yeah, you have to be very careful if you do one-way streets. But there are examples. There was a street in Tokyo that was fantastic where I lived. Palm Springs, the main street in Palm Springs is actually a one-way street, and it's fairly successful because of all of the items that they've implemented in their design. So there are examples of it being done successfully, but then you can look at a lot of places like Calgary, and it's not done well at all. It's they're actually trying to get rid of one-way streets. So,
I think
Thank you.
Carrie had a question too, Don.
sure.
Just going along with the one-way streets, I know I always go back to Nelson because that's where I spend my summers with my folks. Their crosswalks have and also True, Thompson Rivers University, they have center crosswalks in the middle of the block. And I know on True, all of the crosswalks are also speed bumps.
Yeah, and so there's great design elements you can use. Speed bumps is one that Public Works here has told me is something that they don't want to explore because of snow removal. Because when they're snow plowing, yeah, it can cause issues for them. But I think there's probably ways around that as well. We could probably explore certain types of speed bumps, but there's other items too. The center little island that you mentioned, that's a great way of doing it. Anytime you can narrow the crossings for pedestrians, that's a good thing. It also slows drivers down, right? So if you narrow a space, someone driving their vehicle is going to slow down just naturally to drive through there because they don't feel as comfortable of flying through. So yeah, there's lots of ways to design streets to be pedestrian friendly. So something that we really need to look at in our city center, especially Boat Street in particular, both at Granite and at Kootley. Both of those intersections are not great currently. So as everyone is probably well aware of that. So Will, I think Will has a question there.
Yeah, Don, if you wanted to just mention when we're talking about these one-way streets and different, sidewalk items, just mention the inventory that we're working on there of all of the street furniture and all of these, items that include in the downtown that we're working on that. Just mention that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Will and I started in the fall an inventory of every block in downtown. We started going block to block, noting every item that is good in a space, whether it be an existing bike rack or a bench or a flower planter or lighting or signage, et cetera, crosswalks, bump outs, everything. And then also making notes of what we could potentially add or what was needed. Are there missing bike racks? Does there need to be a bus stop shelter? Does there need to be, painted crosswalks or pedestrian flashing lights or whatever it might be? So we started on that project and we both got very, very busy and haven't been able to finish it yet. But now that we have a new planner on staff, I'm hoping we can pick that back up as well. So we'll be able to provide sort of that hopefully a plan or at least a document of that inventory. So we would be able to share that at some point in the future. It's also going to help our Public Works department because if they have a plan of what we need, it'll help them when they're planning install and ordering of these items as well.
Cool.
All right. So the next item here is a pretty big one, and that's the creation of a BIA. There's also a DBA as an alternative. So just wanted to highlight some of the differences between a Chamber of Commerce, a downtown business association versus a business improvement area. The Chamber of Commerce just generally is more of a citywide focus, right? So they focus on businesses across the city. Their membership is of businesses, and that is optional. They do have membership dues, so that's how they have funding. They focus a lot on promotion of business in the community and as a whole, and they also have quite often educational programming for their members. So that can include things like how to market your business or where to find funds for starting up businesses. It can also be things like succession planning, which is very important. We just lost a business on Friday on Quilchena, where the owner retired, and if you have succession planning in place, then maybe that business doesn't shut down. So the chamber can really support these types of activities. A downtown business association is rather than a citywide initiative, they really focus on their area, so the downtown. Their membership is also of businesses and optional based on membership dues. So that's how they normally have their funds as well. The city can also contribute funds to a DBA, but they do get money from membership fees. Promotion is something that is a key focus of downtown business associations, but obviously they're not focusing on promoting the whole community generally. They're focusing on promoting the city center. And they also work on things like events or programming. If they're very well funded, they also sometimes go into things like graffiti removal or installing bike racks or these types of things, but quite often are a bit limited based on funds. A business improvement area is also downtown specific, but it has a bit of a different membership model in that property owners are the members, and property owners it's a mandatory situation. So the city would create a BIA bylaw and create a property tax levy, and all of the members, the property owner members, pay into that. So that's how they fund the organization. Again, promotion, just like a DBA or chamber, is a focus, and in this case, obviously on the city center. Events are usually a big part of what that funding is spent on, but also on space improvement. So we're talking about things like Spirit Square or Quilshena Avenue. Those would be projects that a BIA would potentially have funds to work on. So that way, not all the funding is coming from city, right, where the city is having to spend taxpayer dollars on improving spaces. The BIA itself can potentially have that funds to move the city center forward and further the goals of all the business community. So in that way, it's a great model. I know that it's actually a Canadian model. It was invented in Ontario, BIAs, and there's hundreds of them across Canada now. So that's something that we really should be trying to get business owners and property owners, in this case, property owners, to buy into. I should mention that the property owners quite often will take that the money that they are required to pay on their tax levy and then shift those costs down to the business owners, right? So in their lease, right? So that's how the lease rates could potentially go up because of it. So
Don, there was a good question there. Who runs the BIA? Somebody asked that question.
Yeah, great question. So there's a nonprofit board that's set up, right? So it's just like a DBA would have a board or a chamber would have a board. So there's a board that's set up, and quite often the city, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean or Will, quite often the city will assign someone to be on the board or will have a standing member on the board.
Yeah, I think you hit it exactly right. Oftentimes you'll have a staffer and a counselor that will at least sit on a BIA board, and not that can't happen with a DBA as well. But again, I think you hit the key difference there is the kind of mandatory tax-based approach versus the optional member dues approach. And because of that, it makes it a little bit easier for cities to contribute to BIAs often than DBAs, because it looks, we can't provide assistance to business, and if there's voluntary optional membership, it's more problematic than if you're broadly providing support to a whole swath of area or whatever that is. So that's one of the reasons why BIAs have become more favored, as cities are often more comfortable contributing funds to a BIA than DBAs historically.
Now, Don, would most of the executive come from the businesses in that area, or is that what you would vision seeing happening there with that BIA as well?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. Another question we hear is, why is it for downtown businesses only?
BIAs can be for other areas as well, but we're focusing in this topic on city center revitalization. So it would be, most likely we would have a BIA for the city center. If we wanted to look at a second BIA for up by River Ranch area or something like that, that could be something potentially in the future. But yeah, because we want to revitalize our downtown, that's why you actually have to designate an area as part of the bylaw, and then all the property owners, commercial property owners within that zone are mandatory members. So
Oh, that makes sense.
okay. And I should mention here that the city support versus BIA. So once you have it in place, the city usually is focused on the policy, of course, obviously setting up the bylaw, and the BIA itself would be organizing events, funding space improvements, promoting, and all of that. Not to say that city can't contribute to some of those efforts, but the BIA usually takes a lead on those types of things. Okay, Councillor Christopherson first.
Just a quick question about the BIAs. If the tax levy is on the property owners, is there the difficulty that they might in turn just pass it on to the renters that, you know, that are running the businesses? But because we've got quite a few businesses downtown that are owned by outside interests.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the crux of the conversation about setting up a BIA is it's the property owners that are paying, but usually what they'll do is they'll pass that on to the business owners through their lease agreements. So it ends up being the business owners that are paying in the end, generally. So, and I think Sean has a comment on that as well.
Yeah, I want to speak one point on that and then one other just difference between BIAs and DBAs. But generally speaking, it's actually seen as better for businesses with the BIA. And the reason actually goes back to what Don said earlier is we have a number of vacant businesses. And so if you set up a DBA, they're not contributing to the costs of making your downtown better. But this is a way to functionally tax some of the vacant businesses that will ultimately provide services to make all of that downtown area or whatever the area is set out in the BIA, you know, better, more attractive for visitors, et cetera. And so it's one way that you can address the challenge of vacant properties kind of through a unique mechanism. So generally it is seen as more favorable because, and everybody knows that you're all in it. The one thing that I did want to add as well is there's a difference in how you form a DBA versus a BIA, because BIAs do require more than 50% of the whoever the property owners in the area of the BIA that's being set up to vote for it. And so that means that there's often a lot of the work for BIAs is done on the front end. You do a lot of planning and forethought, whereas sometimes you'll see downtown business associations just sort of form and then you figure it all out later. But with BIAs, you have to be really regimented and structured up front. You want the businesses to understand the benefits up front, and then you'll put it to the group as a vote. And so if there was an interest in moving towards a BIA model, again, this is just my opinion, but I think that this group would be really crucial in helping businesses understand what some of those potential benefits could be, and sharing that information out, because it's harder to form a BIA, but once it's set up, it can be a very effective mechanism.
Yeah, great point, Sean. Thank you. So then moving forward, we also have policy and tax incentives that can be implemented. Again, this is something that city can work on, and we have been doing. So on the policy side, obviously OCP, ECDEV, city center plans, and the new zoning bylaw, which is a huge help for us. But we can also look at incentives. So we have a revitalization tax bylaw, but we're looking at revising that. And I think we're going to be focusing mostly on city center when it comes to the new bylaw. Facade improvement program is another example. A lot of downtowns have had a lot of success with that. That's sort of a matching program where the city, generally how it's set up is the city contributes a few $1,000s, the business matches that, and now you have a pool of money that you can improve the facade of your business. And over a number of years, you know, your entire main street can be revitalized from the aesthetic look of the businesses. So there's lots of other types of incentives that can be explored as well. And obviously, the city and the BIA can work together on those types of things. Another important aspect is business attraction and retention. And a number of groups who can work on these items. Obviously, the ECDev team here at the city, BIA and Chamber of Commerce would all be working towards attracting businesses. There's also the private community around development and real estate agents, as Tony is well aware, quite often is reaching out to companies or businesses or contacting real estate agents. And so there's a number of groups that can work to attract businesses. But retention is also very important. I alluded to Brambles earlier. That's a pretty big loss for our Main Street, but also, Linda's Cafe is closed, Mary's Cafe, Canada Cafe relocated out of downtown. So we've already, just in the last few months, we've lost 4 food establishments, 3 of them on Quilchena. So that's something that we want to try to avoid. And so retention of businesses is really important as well. And that's really important, specifically when we're talking about Quilchena. We need to have an appropriate business mix. And what I mean by that is there's certain types of businesses that create a vibrant Main Street where people want to hang out, they want to stroll, they want to frequent the businesses, window shop, all of that. One of the types is I mentioned food. Restaurants, cafes, bars, breweries are a great way. They also help with having activity on the street in the evenings and weekends, because usually restaurants are open during those times. Retail, but not any type of retail, window shopping and strolling type of retail. What I mean is when you're walking down a street, you look in their window and see, oh, that seems like they've got cool things there, cool knickknacks or clothes or whatever. I'm going to go in that shop and check out what they have. Whereas other businesses that are great businesses for our downtown, I'm thinking of, banks can be one, but Black's Pharmacy, great business, but I'm not going to be strolling down the street and say, oh, I think I'm going to pop in here and get a prescription. I go to Black's specifically for that purpose, right? So there's certain types of retail that encourage strolling and window shopping and spending more time on your Main Street, which is what we want to do. We want to create a vibrant space. And then this is a tougher conversation around the government and nonprofit offices that are on the Main Street, on Quilchena specifically. Our new zoning bylaw actually has created that those are now non-conforming on Quilchena, so they can stay there as long as they want. That's not an issue. But if one of them moves, the same type of organization cannot move into that space. So so for example, if the food bank were to relocate out of that building, we wouldn't have a new nonprofit move into that building. It would now be a space that could be a retail store or a restaurant or a brewery or whatever, but it wouldn't be another nonprofit, it wouldn't be another government office. So that's something we did in the zoning bylaw to help that change over time. But there's a number of organizations and offices on Quilchena. One of the problems, I'm thinking the Ministry of Transportation, Work BC, Canate, Food Bank. There's a lot of these. They need to be in downtown, but how can we help those organizations to be in other buildings in downtown, whether it be on Granite or Vote or Garcia or Kootley? Right now, there just aren't spaces for them to move to. I know that the food bank, for example, has been wanting to do that, but they're having a struggle finding a space to move to. So that's something we need to work on, and that's the development community has to help with that as well, to create, and the property owners to create new buildings for organizations to move into. But I think it's a bit of an uncomfortable conversation, because you don't want to say, like, we don't want you, because we do. All of those organizations are super important and they need to be in our downtown. But being right on Quilchena is not helping to create a vibrant situation for the Main Street that we would all like to have, I think. So so how we can support that is a bit of a challenge. Then speaking of vibrancy, activating spaces is another thing we need to do. And So having festivals, events, food trucks, buskers, anything we can do to create a buzz, activity in our downtown, whether that be in Spirit Square, on Colchena Avenue, or on other streets, but in the downtown in general. The BIA can really help with that, because once the BIA is set up, you have businesses that are part of that. You have a board and business owners that can volunteer. They can help provide organization for those events. Obviously, the funding that they bring in from the tax levy, and then the promotional abilities that BIAs have can help with all of those types of programming and events. So having a BIA really will help with that. The city, of course, would be involved in this. We can help with permitting, things like road closures or other types of permitting, financial contribution, in-kind contribution as well. We mentioned grant and aid, of course. So if we have like the Christmas market or those types of things that the city contributes to. And then, of course, participation and promotion. So the city pop-up booth, Will and I were both at the farmers markets back in the fall. We had farmers market on Colchena in October, and then again in November. And Colchena, the main center block of Colchena, was closed, and the city had a pop-up booth there. So, and we promoted that event on the city website, social media, in the newspaper, and on the radio. So the city really helped promote that event with the farmers market, and it was a great success. So, so that's sort of how the city can be involved in this as well.
Don?
Yeah.
There's some great questions popping up here. Are you going to answer these later?
Yeah, I don't have the chat open on mine, but I can open at the end. But anyone feel free to jump in as well.
Okay, I'm trying to. So one of the last questions was, can the BIA partner with the chamber on some of these things? I think that was the last one I saw there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the chamber has a vital role in the community. The chamber's focus is the entire business community, and obviously providing, I mentioned earlier, educational supports for businesses, but also promotional supports. So there can definitely be a partnership between the two. In fact, that's ideal, right? So so it's really important. So it's not like a BIA is replacing a chamber. They actually work hand in glove. So.
Right. And there was another question I saw there. Somebody asked, do we have incentives to help businesses that may want to move? Hey, you're right. We don't belong in this block. We belong in the block over. Is there will there be incentives? Is there programs that we can implement in that to be able to help businesses do that? Because I see that as, well, I guess this person sees this as whoever asked. I can't remember who asked it. That question. I think that's good if they can. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to throw that to Sean, because on the helping businesses, there's some legalities around that. So,
yeah.
So one of the unique ways, and again, this is going to sound like we're like a rah BIA, but this is something that some property owners, again, because it's not the businesses, it's the property owners that are behind it. And if the property owners have a vested interest in making sure that, they are seeing the development of this in a way that is going to maximize, their return and bring the right business mix in. Sometimes what you will see is that BIA will contribute. It's not usually huge amounts, I'm going to be honest, but there has been incentives that I've seen through BIAs to either attract certain businesses saying, hey, we're looking for a restaurant that's of this particular type to come in here, because what they want to do is create a business mix that's going to be synergistic, that is going to, attract people and get them all there downtown, so that all of these businesses are going to be able to thrive more together. So it is possible. Again, a nonprofit can do it in ways that a city can't. And that's the advantage of a BIA, is they have their own mechanism, and they can create programs for their society that are going to incentivize. Again, I've seen it more on attracting certain things in than I have on sending other things out. But because of the nature of it being property owners instead of business owners, it's a possibility and something that could be explored. But it's harder on the city side to incentivize movement of business.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
There is something that we did include in our zoning bylaw. Just as we have bonusing and for height bonusing in downtown around affordable housing, we did something similar with affordable lease space. So We still have to actually create some sort of guidelines around that. We put it in the zoning bylaw, so it was there, but now we actually have to create the program to catch up to it. But basically, if you're a business, a property owner, and you create a building, if you dedicate a X percentage, I believe it's 20% in our bylaw right now, 20% of the space as affordable or below market lease space, then you get incentives in terms of you can have a height bonus or density bonus and things like that. So yeah, so there are some ways that the city can do it, but we also aren't allowed to be seen as supporting businesses, as Sean mentioned. So going through the BIA in that way is a great way of doing that.
Yeah, and I really do want to clarify that for this group, because it's one of the points that is often most frustrating for people. We are absolutely in the business of supporting businesses generally, but when it comes to supporting an individual business, that's where you have more potential to run afoul of the assistance to business provisions in the community charter. And so when we're talking about incentivizing an individual organization to move, or an individual, that can be a little bit more complicated, but that can be well facilitated through a nonprofit society. So the city can support through the provision of funds to some of these nonprofit societies, and then they can take action. Nobody sue me for saying this.
That's good clarification, Sean.
Yeah. So I talked already about appropriate business mix there, and we also need for vibrancy patios. So, you know, if we have restaurants, then you can create patios. And then, of course, having pedestrians. So having that window shopping, or that the stores where people want to stroll along the street. All of those things create a vibrant street and a vibrant neighborhood. Policy, we've talked about the OCP, the ECDEV plan, City Center Revitalization Plan, but there's others that also help. The Active Transportation Plan that was adopted by Council this spring has a lot of provisions or action items in there around things like putting in bike parking in the downtown, or bike lanes from other neighborhoods into downtown. So those projects will all help revitalize the downtown. The wayfinding strategy, that's another document that needs a bit of an update. I believe we've achieved all of the action items in that wayfinding strategy, if I'm correct, Will?
Yeah, that's correct. It needs an update on that one.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, having appropriate signage in downtown, it really helps, get people around, especially when you have tourists coming to your community. Vehicle speeds, I'm not going to dwell on this one much. I know Mr. Smith brought a council report a few months ago, and it's one that staff want to not touch with a 10-foot pole. But generally, if you have lower vehicle speeds, you have a better pedestrian experience. People want to walk around if they're not afraid to be run over, is to put it bluntly. And 30 kilometers an hour would be, you know, probably an ideal scenario, but I don't know if we're going to get, you know, any sort of mandate from the public if we put that out to a survey or a poll, like we're going to do at some point. But hopefully we will. Hopefully people will be on board with lower speed limits in our downtown, because it really will help with revitalizing the space and making it a pedestrian friendly area. I would love to go to 20 kilometers an hour in Quilchena if I could, but I think that probably won't be supported. 30 would be better than nothing.
You guys are
Dawn,
seeing
I
the
think
fun
we had
internal debates we have over here.
Yeah, this is the planning debate, you know, versus public works versus, you know, different, like how, right?
But, citizens, yeah.
Citizens, yeah.
Versus the politicians.
Right,
We had talked about trying to reduce speed limit off our arterial highways, and which I assume is Vote and Nicola. But Quilchena would not be considered an arterial one to me, and I may be wrong, but
yeah, and that's the interesting thing. Quilchena is an arterial. So what we would be looking at, because that survey around the vehicle speeds would be a community-wide thing. So obviously local roads versus collector versus arterial. But the city center would be its own thing, I think, because Quilchena and Vote are both arterials, but I don't think it would be appropriate to have 50-kilometer-hour speed limits on Vote in Quilchena in our downtown. It would make more sense to go down to 30 kilometers in our downtown. But obviously, Quilchena outside of downtown and Vote outside of downtown are arterials. So keeping those at 50 kilometers would probably make more sense. But that'll be up to community and council to decide on that one. And obviously, that's sort of my 2 cents on it. But yeah, vehicle speeds are a really important piece of this as well. And then streets. So streets and spaces. So all of these here I've listed are some of the projects that I thought of. Obviously, the pedestrian mall and Spirit Square there. I didn't list the washrooms because we'll get to that. But when we talk about Spirit Square, all of these other items are also projects that we should be looking at, or BIA could be looking at.
And Don, I thought council, and maybe it wasn't in a council meeting, but I thought we had decided that those butt containers, cigarette butt containers, were important for everywhere downtown as well.
Yeah, so that's a great one. So that would fit in with the street furniture. So I'm going to make a note of that one. So bike racks, lighting, benches, garbage bins, recycling bins, cigarette butt containers, wayfinding. We mentioned signs already. So there's a lot of different elements that you can bring into a street. Street trees is another one, right? If you have shade, that really helps, especially in the summertime. Street art and murals, that's another one we're working on. Of course, council granted $5,000 to the Arts Council to work that. So Will has mainly been working on that, but I've been sort of in the loop a little bit on it, and we'll be taking that forward. Street trees I mentioned. So Quilchena, obviously, the Quilchena street trees is a bit of an issue because they're old now and they're affecting the infrastructure and the sidewalks. So we have to figure out what to do about that. Cutting them down would be unfortunate, but if we have to do that, we would obviously be replacing them with new trees. So we have to come up with a plan of attack on that one. Kootley is another street. There's no street trees on Kootley. It would be a much better streetscape if there were. Garcia could also, so there's some work to do, I think, around that. The Garcia parking lot, the city owns a parking lot there beside Mongo's Grill and across from Mary's former Mary's Cafe. And whether we want to improve that parking lot, add electric charging stations, for example, these types of things to encourage people with electric cars to charge their vehicle and then stroll downtown. That's a lot of communities have done that elsewhere in BC and elsewhere in North America. Vote the crosswalks I mentioned, Granite and Kootley. Granite is a particularly troublesome corner at the post office there. Obviously, we have the pedestrian flashing lights there, which has really helped, but it would be great probably if we do curb extensions to have even more visibility for pedestrians. And Kootley, business owners, multiple business owners have told Will and I that that's a troubling corner. There's quite often conflicts at that corner between vehicles and pedestrians. There's also lanes. So specifically the lane behind Spirit Square, but lanes can be a great way to create interesting spaces, whether it be through murals or activities. Like some communities put food trucks in their laneways. I'm thinking of Squamish and Portville and various places. So you can really take advantage of your lanes as an additional, like a third space, right? So that's something to think about. And then we get to the pedestrian mall and Spirit Square. So I'm going to jump into those. I'm going to hit on Spirit Square first. So I took this photo on the weekend. There's a lot of great elements already in Spirit Square, but there's some things that need to be added. And so the next slide, I'll talk about what we need. But you can see here, we have really nice landscaping. There's great murals. There's a performance band shell, which is fantastic when you want to do events. There's even seating. It's not the most conversational seating or maybe the ideal seating to create a vibrant space, but there is seating there as well. So there are some good elements there. It's also in our downtown, which is great, and it's right on Vote. Ideally this would be on Quilchena, but it's a block off. So there are ways that we could potentially connect through the lane to Quilchena as well. but it's also just one block over. So it's got a great location and it's got some really great elements. But there are some things that the subcommittee should be thinking about, and those are these 6 items. The first one is food. Food, people gather around food. So if you have food in a space, that brings people there, and it helps people linger, right? Quite often you're going to have that food, you're going to sit on the benches or the tables or whatever is there, and you're going to spend time and conversate and socialize. And then other people are going to want to do that because humans are intrinsically social beings, right? We want to be around other people generally. Maybe not in COVID times, but in non-COVID times, people want to be around each other. And so when you see other people gathering and eating and conversating, you want to do the same thing. So food is huge. We really need to do that. The CPO building there is potential there. That's a bit of a difficult or a conversation we'll need to have as well. We talked about organizations relocating, whether the CPO office could be better suited in another location, and that building could be used for a cafe or a coffee shop in Spirit Square. That's something that will need to be discussed, but that certainly is an opportunity there potentially. And I'll give an example of another square in another city that did that very thing, and it really helped. So providing a food option is really important. And if it's not the building that's there, bringing food trucks to the space is another way of doing that, right? So there's a few options or different types of ways to do that. Programming, this is huge. So if you don't have anything really happening in the square, there's really not a lot to attract people there other than if you had the food, that's one way. But if you have events there, that's a great way of doing it. So music in the park could potentially be music in the square. And I know they've tried that, and there's the washroom issue is one of the reasons why they've decided now they're going to just go back to Central Park. But really, we should be trying to have music in the square. Yoga in the park, could be yoga in the square. Dance classes could be there. Buskers. There's a lot of different events that anything that could happen outdoors, could potentially be there. And we really should be looking at programming that space all day long on weekdays, in evenings, and on weekends as well. So really, it's 7 days a week. We should be trying to have activities there. And I don't think a lot of people know that you can book Spirit Square just like you would book a room at the Civic Center. So you can do events there too. If you want to get married, you could do a wedding at Spirit Square. You could book that through the recreation department. Same thing with a nonprofit that wants to do a fundraiser event or anything. So any type of activity or programming that we can get into Spirit Square is going to be really important. I mentioned about seating, so conversational seating. I'm just going to go back one slide to show you. So the benches that are there, you can sit and sort of turn and talk to people, but it's better if you have tables or some sort of benches across from each other so that you can create a conversational environment. These types of benches are not very conducive to that. So creating conversational seating is really great for creating a social environment and to keep people lingering longer, right? That's what the goal is to keep people in the space more for longer periods of time. And interactivity is another way to do that. So we have a piano in the band shell there. We have a chessboard, like a human-sized chessboard. We have other games and things like that, but we don't use them. And I think the concern there is like, are they going to be damaged or stolen or, damaged in some way? Or so we need to try to get over that. And it is obviously it's a concern, but it doesn't necessarily, need to be an issue. So I think we really need to look at that. A piano is a great way. If you have a piano in the square and say, come play the piano, people will do that, right? Same with the chessboards and different types of games, art installations, right? So if you have different types of interactive art, that can really work. So, working with the Arts Council, we could look at that. Cultural and historical plaques. We do have some plaques on the sort of the entry gateway there to the square, but having different types of cultural or informational materials can be one way as well. So there's lots of different ways to create interactivity in a space. So that's a really great way to get people to spend time there and to be involved. Shade is another one. One of the other reasons that Music in the Park didn't want to stay in the square is it can get really hot there. There's no shade. So we need to think about how we might introduce some sort of shade. So if you're creating tables and chairs, you can create umbrellas, and that can create some shade. Obviously, we need to think about how those umbrellas are being weighted down with our windy afternoons and early evenings. But having shade for people is going to be important. We could look at sails across the square as well, but that costs more money, and then there's the wind considerations. So that has to be designed in a particular way. But there's different options that we could look at to provide shade so that it's a more comfortable experience being in the square for periods of time. And then washrooms. So obviously there's a subcommittee specifically for this one. It's super important. If you don't have a washroom, it's, you know, how do you have food without a washroom? How do you have events without a washroom? We really do need to solve that. And so the CPO building potentially as well, just as a consideration, could be an option there to have part of that building renovated into a washroom space. So if it was a cafe or coffee shop and washroom, that would go a long way to solve a couple of these items here. But again, that's a conversation we need to have around the CPO, and if we were doing that, where do they move to, and all of that. So so it's not a simple fix, but it's something that we should probably consider or talk about. Any questions about these items? Okay, so I'm going to highlight some of that in the next slide. So this is in Edmonton. On the right-hand side here, you can see an empty space. That is the square, how it used to look. This is the City Hall Square, Churchill Square in Edmonton. The larger photo is what it looks like now. So they've done those 6 things I mentioned, they've done that in that square. So you can see the red chairs, they're not bolted down, they're foldable chairs. And there was actually, this was set up as a pilot project because they didn't know what was going to work. So they actually took 2 squares, this square in front of City Hall and another square in front of the Legislature building. And they programmed the Legislature building one, much like our Spirit Square is now, nice landscaping, some few benches, you know, some decorative things like that, but nothing beyond that. And they did this square with a coffee shop. So just off the side here, they have a building much like the CPO building for a coffee shop. They added, of course, umbrellas and tables and chairs. You can see there's vendors over at the side here. There's trees there where the vendors are. There's also human-sized chessboards, and you can see there's fountains there. The fountains were there before, but kids can play in the fountains. And so there's all kinds of things to do. But the big thing as well is they have events in this space all day long and all evening long and on the weekends. So people want to be there because there's actually activities happening, whether it be buskers or performances, etc. And of course they have the food, and they have the shade, and they have the seating. So all of those items that I just mentioned, they brought it all together, and you can see that it's a pretty popular space now, especially the contrast from the before and after. So there is a caveat to this. Of course, downtown Edmonton, there's a lot of people. So there was a lot of people already in the downtown, and now they're just gathering. We need to first get people into our downtown so that we can then get them gathering in our Spirit Square or on our Quilchena Avenue. So so we've got some steps to do before that to get the people downtown, first of all. But certainly people that are there during the workday might come over to Spirit Square at lunchtime if we had food there and we had programming there at lunchtimes, right? So we could start programming at lunchtimes on weekdays and then expand from there over time as more and more people are spending time in downtown. So Quilchena Avenue, as I mentioned, I took this photo on the weekend in the afternoon, 2 photos. So there weren't a lot of businesses open and there weren't a lot of people there. So we have a lot of work to do to get people in our downtown, especially on the weekends and the evenings, because this isn't a very vibrant space right now. So so all the things we've talked about already today will lead us to creating that vibrant space. And so hopefully this photo here in a few years from now will be a thing of the past, and we'll be able to look back and chuckle about it, about, you know, look at what it used to be and what it is today. Isn't it a change, right? And there are a number of ways that we've talked about a lot of them yet, but here are some of the items just summarized. So the appropriate business mix, that's really important so that we have those restaurants, cafes, and window shopping retail. The relocation of some of those organizations so that we have those spaces to be that. The improved streetscape, as we mentioned, all of those different types of items, festival events, foods, buskers, all of that, and walkability, bikeability. So we've talked about pretty much all of these. So if we can implement all of these items, and you know, it'll take us some time to do this, but if we keep on, you know, get a start on it, we can create a vibrant space, and, you know, eventually get to the main street that we all would like to have. So here is an example of a community that has done that. Kelowna, Bernard Avenue. And I didn't find, I tried to find a photo from like about 10, 15 years ago, because it's really not been a long time since, you know, they've made these changes in the last decade, right, in Kelowna. But I did find a photo from maybe about 50, 60, 70 years ago there, where it was very car oriented on Bernard Avenue once upon a time. And you can see now it's a lot of patios. They've got street furniture. There's really a much more walkable community, but a big part of that is the businesses that are there, right? It's the businesses that should be on your main street. So Bernard Avenue is an example.
I think, Don, that picture of what 50s, 60s was before they had the malls in the outlying areas and before Kelowna became so big that, I mean, that was their downtown core. And
That's
they
right.
lost a lot of that downtown core because of the expansion elsewhere. And now they've, I think they've done well with the way they've got it now.
Exactly.
But they have a very active bus line that just runs parallel to Bernard as well. So that helps.
Yeah, it does. And that's one of the things, like we do have our transit routes all kind of converge here at City Hall. So which is, you know, fairly close, but we also need to get some of those bike lanes built out, you know, so that people can bike downtown, and then of course have bike parking in downtown, and you know, really to get people down there. And then of course, as I mentioned earlier, having housing in downtown, getting some apartments built so that people can be there. If you live in downtown, you're going to shop in downtown. So that's a huge one. Yeah. So, but Bernard Avenue provides us some examples of or inspiration of just a few years ago, how they went from, like you were saying, a bit of a desolate downtown that had been devastated by businesses that had moved out to the shopping malls, and they've been able to reinvigorate their downtown. So, so that does give us some hope for sure. Now, this has been a lot, so I don't want to overwhelm everyone. These can happen concurrently, right? City staff are working on some of these. The committee can work on some of these. A BIA could work on some of these. The chamber can help with some of these. We can all be working together and be working on different aspects at the same time. So it's not like we have to do one and then the other and then the other. So that's really important to know. So I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed by all of this. If we get a start on it, we can accomplish a lot. And I know that just since I have been here in the last 18 months, we've already accomplished quite a bit on the policy side. So now it's really exciting to start thinking about action items and implementing things so that people can see what the framework we've already created and what that's actually going to create. So on the pilot project side, I have a quote here. This is from a professor of mine back when I did my business degree. And I don't want to date myself because I am a bit older than I look, so I won't tell you when that was, but a few years ago anyway. He said, "Don't wait until you're ready because you'll never be ready." And he was specifically talking about starting a business, but I find that this saying or this phrase can be applied to many aspects of life, including downtown revitalization. You know, we don't need to have all of these pieces in place. We don't have to have a perfect scenario. We can just get a start. Let's get a start on things. And so that's really important. We do need all of those pieces to come together, but we don't need to accomplish one and then the other, then the other. We can start on all of them and work through them, and we'll make some mistakes and we'll revise and change. And that's the great part about pilot projects. You can change them. You can alter course and make revisions as you go, because their pilot projects are inherently temporary, or they're works in progress. And so they end up usually becoming permanent, but it's certainly, you know, you can adapt them over time. So that's why they work really well. And I do have some ideas here as well. So Coolshena could start out with periodic closures. So like we did the farmers market back in the fall, we closed one, I think in October we did a Saturday, and then in November we did a Saturday and Sunday. So you could start like that, where you have once a month closures, then you could go to once a week closures, then you could go, right? So you can ramp it up over time. Same thing with the night market, right? I know that the night market used to be every Friday night, you know, so you could start with that sort of thing, you know, where you're closing on a Friday night. A lunchtime stroll, we talked about that as part of the economic recovery group last year, about the possibility of closing one lunchtime per week. I think it was going to be Wednesday we were going to do. We never got around to it last summer, but maybe this summer we can try to implement that. But then that could go, you know, could start one lunch hour, and then maybe it could become 5 lunch hours, like every weekday lunch hour. And so you can start things and then slowly ramp them up over time as people get more comfortable, as we create a more vibrant downtown, as we have more people living downtown, as we have more businesses on our main street that create that appropriate mix. So you can start and then wrap it up over time. Spirit Square, same type of thing. I think we can start promoting that it's a bookable space, and so you can have events there. We can do that. COVID, it's a little bit tough right now, but there still are things you can physically distance activities, some activities, right? Trying to encourage music in the square, yoga in the square, to come back from Central Park. Obviously, the washroom and the shade, those two things are really important part of that. So we need to solve those. I mentioned the coffee shop, so whether that is the CPO building that we repurpose, or if we create some other situation where it's a food truck or something. And then the downtown washrooms, again, we really do need to look at potentially, I think Spirit Square is probably the ideal location for that. But if it's not Spirit Square, let's think about another location, but we need to have public washrooms. Obviously, that's for people who are coming downtown and tourists, but also for our vulnerable populations that are downtown as well. So that's obviously a project in itself, which makes sense that there's a subcommittee just for the downtown washroom. And I mentioned these can be ramped up over time. So I just want to quickly give a couple examples of pilot projects. This is the downtown Calgary cycle track. So the picture on the right here is what 12th Avenue looked like prior. So they had wide car lanes, and what they did is they narrowed the car lanes a bit. They were able to create this cycle track. You can see these are concrete barriers, but originally they started with plastic barriers that were filled with sand, and they had temporary signs. These are more permanent now because it's become permanent. But they had a 2-year pilot project, and it got people used to the idea because there was not 50% support for bike lanes in Calgary at the time. There was maybe 20% support when they started the pilot project. And by the time they did the 2-year project, obviously they made changes over time, revisions. They had to move barriers here or change signs here or whatever, based on feedback from the public and from business owners, et cetera. But after the 2 years, they had it pretty much, it was running pretty slick and highly used. You wouldn't know here because it's a night photo, but it's actually really, really well used. And it became permanent. The council voted it to become a permanent fixture. So then they replaced the temporary barriers and all that with more permanent ones. So, so that's an example of a pilot project and how they sort of ramped it up over time and revised it, et cetera. Here's a really relevant one for Spirit Square, Robson Square. So a lot of you probably know the sort of history of Robson Square. It used to be a street just like on the right-hand side here. And then they started closing it to, you know, 1 weekend a month, and then they ramped that up to every weekend. And then they had a whole summer closure, right? They had temporary furniture in there, and they tried different things. they tried tables, they tried benches, different types of things. And then eventually it became permanent. And so now Robson Square is a permanent square, and the street actually was closed. So this has some relevance for both Spirit Square and Colchana Avenue potentially. And you can see there it's quite popular now, obviously. You know, whenever it's a sunny day, people are out there in droves. And a couple more. So Kelowna, we talked about Burnett Avenue already about their patios, but right now they have a pilot project where they've closed the street and they've extended their patio space for COVID purposes. And they've been working through some of the challenges around that. And it's so they're you know, refining it and working on it over time. And so we'll see how that goes this summer. But yeah, it's certainly been a change for them. And who knows, maybe they end up creating a pedestrian street like we're considering for Colchana eventually as a result of this. And then Lonsdale and North Van is another example. They didn't close the full street, but they closed the parallel parking on and added tables and spaces. So you can see here, they have the sort of plastic barriers there that are filled with, I think those are sand filled. Linda would actually know more, being that she's from the city of North Van. She's joined us from there. But, and this is my old neighborhood, actually, Central Lonsdale. It's a great area. They have lots of restaurants and retail and things like that. So it's a really great neighborhood. But obviously they've been able to do this sort of pilot project, and they're, you know, refining it as they need. So down the hill as well at the Quay, they've also have a plaza there, and it's it's actually the first place where public drinking was legalized. So City of North Van is known for that. So that they did a pilot project around that, and it's working really well. So so those are some examples of pilot projects and how we could take inspiration from that for Spirit Square and Colchana. So these are some of the suggested steps for the committee then out of that. And again, this is just suggestions. So, but I would love if we had more engagement around the OCP, the Economic Development Action Plan when we get to that, and the City Center Revitalization Plan. So encouraging business owners to help participate in that, and property owners in downtown as well. Starting conversation around the BIA, I think that's going to be a really big conversation. So, you know, committee members could help start that conversation. And then, of course, working with city staff on these pilot projects, the 3 subcommittees that have been created so far, and if any of those other projects in the future, right? So working with staff on that. Speaking of staff, there's some things that we're doing as well. So the staff working groups, this is something that Sean and I were talking about earlier today. We're going to be rolling out at our management level soon, where we're planning to create some interdepartmental working groups on certain topics. And that's to create more sort of a capacity, I suppose, when we have staff working with one another. So I'm hoping to see a city center revitalization project team created, as well as a street furniture one. So we talked about all those elements that could be installed, whether it be bike racks or lighting or street trees or cigarette butt dispensers, et cetera, et cetera. And then transportation as well. So that's roads, active transportation like walking and biking, and also BC Transit. And potentially we're doing the service review right now with BC Transit. So, you know, all of those types of things could be discussed at a staff level. Of course, as I mentioned, we're working on hiring a replacement for our departing Will George, and as well as the Economic Recovery Advisor that we received grant funding from the province for, or UBCM, was it, Will? I believe.
That was, yeah, a separate grant from ETSI BC.
ETSI, that's what it was. Yeah, thank you. And of course, the OCP, the ACTEV plan, and the revitalization plan we're working on. We, of course, will work on supporting the BIA as well. Obviously, staff would have to create a bylaw and bring that to council. And encouraging housing creation. So working with the development community, real estate agents, property owners to try to get housing built in downtown. And then, of course, helping the committee work through the pilot projects, specifically for Spirit Square and Colchena and the downtown washrooms as part of those. So that's kind of my spiel. I know I've gone on a little longer than we expected, but thanks to everyone for your patience and attention on that. And maybe if there's some more questions, Tony, there, I can run through any of those if I haven't addressed them. I did want to highlight, we do have a new data feature on our website that Mr. George has worked on. So if you go under the Doing Business tab, you can click on Merit Data, and it will take you to this great resource. So we have all kinds of economic development data that can be helpful for businesses and attracting businesses to the community. So Kurt, I see your hand up.
Just a quick question, and I don't expect an answer at this time, but I'm just wondering, we've heard so many people comment on the Coldwater Hotel because it's such a iconic building in town. But it's frustrating that there's very little that the city can actually do about it. But I'm just wondering if it is or can be put on city radar at all, that before it falls down, it might be nice to try to do something to save it.
Yeah, and so it's a bit of a complicated one. We don't have a heritage registry here in the community. We have the heritage plaques, but those are really just for tourist purposes. So we don't have an official heritage registry, so we don't have any legal protections around historic buildings currently. We do have a heritage committee, but it hasn't met in, I think, about 5 or 6 years. So we don't have really participation around that. So it's something that we could potentially look at setting up. We do actually have the new owners recently submitted their application for what they want to do to the Coldwater Hotel. And staff, because development permits are something that staff can work on, but because of the importance of that building, we're considering bringing that to council for council review, because the changes that they're wanting to do to the facade of the building, obviously, that's going to be important for the community. So that's something that we might want to do, but they're actually looking to revitalize the building. Yeah, so that's something there, but it's a little bit difficult because our OCP has policies around development permits, and it doesn't have all of the robust guidelines that staff are currently working on for the new OCP. So anyone who applies now is under the current OCP, so we only have the protections that are there, and we don't have a heritage registry, so we're a little bit hamstrung on these things. So hopefully we can come to some resolution with the owners there to make sure that building is obviously the jewel that it should be, right? I mean, it's been in a bit of disrepair for a while, so hopefully it can be revitalized. That'll help our Main Street as well, obviously.
Thank you, Don.
And I think I see Celia's hand up. Yep.
Isla, a new term for me. I'm supposed to learn something every day. What's a busker?
That's a street performer, so it could be someone playing guitar, or it could be someone juggling, or basically a street performer.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, Don, thank you very much for that. I mean, I've been sitting in council and hearing some of these ideas and things thrown around there, but you just filled my head with all kinds of ideas and excitement as well, what we can do with our downtown. We just got to come together and work together on this. And just, anybody else's comments quickly about Don's presentation? I think he did a great job. I think it really laid a foundation for us and our working groups that we've got going right now. And that's exactly what I wanted. There was that for you to kind of fill in some pieces for us there, Don, and especially in the Spirit Square and the Colchena piece, really huge. Any last comments for Dawn or any takeaways? Dawn they will be sending this presentation out for you, so please take it back to your working groups and send, well, everybody will get it so they can go through it. So if there's any question, they can come back to us on that. So I really appreciate that. That was awesome. Now, in the interest of time, for the rest of the agenda, we were going to go over and just have a quick update from the each of the working groups, but I think we're going to postpone that. We're going to do that next meeting. We got a lot of work to do, folks. Please tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we're going to have to meet every month for the next little while. Somebody wants to chastise me, they can, but I just excited about what we can do here. Summer's coming up, and I think we can get some stuff rolling here. And Dawn's given us kind of a path to go. We don't need to try to bake the whole pie or eat the whole pie. We can take a bite at a time, and I think we can do that. And I think that's some good advice, Dawn, to do that. And so what we'll do is we'll spend, I think, the next meeting really talking about pulling these working groups together and start as quick as possible, make some recommendations if that's good. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Well, that's good. Well, fine. That we'll call it an end. It's been a couple of hours. So, Dawn, thank you very much for everything you've done here, and really appreciate all you've done and what the stuff you've laid out here. Oh, sorry, there was one big takeaway, and I think we're going to have to look at this. Dawn, you've talked on it a couple of times. Is that I think we're going to have to pull a working group together for the BIA. I think that's pretty critical. I think we'll put a working. I think that'd be the best because you're going to want staff, and I think staff and business owners work together on that. Is that correct? And so if we can get a working group here in the Economic Development Committee, we can work with staff to get that going, right? Because it sounded like you had to do a lot more front work on that before you actually put that in place. So we got to do some schmoozing with some business owners down there, I guess, eh?
Yeah, so what we could do, Sean, maybe for the management meeting, we can talk about whether that's the city center revitalization working group or if we have a BIA specific one. But yeah, we'll talk about that and see what we can put together.
Yeah, and let us know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one of the major things that we do want to work out with this committee still is exactly how the committee can be involved moving forward, because we want to make sure to keep you in the loop so that you can then report back to council on some of what's happening, while making sure that, let's just be candid, staff are going to have more opportunity to advance some of these things in the month in between, but making sure that we're getting the right level of input and oversight from this committee, I think, is going to be one of the major things that we want to kind of nail down over this next month.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want to make sure we got the input from this committee for sure, from the business owners and that. So, got a hand up there, Dawn? Somebody's got a question?
I think Linda.
Oh.
Actually, that's me, Councillor Lack.
Oh.
I just wanted to jump in here and just say that the next meeting's scheduled for July 14th. Just so everyone's aware.
Okay, well, we better, if everybody's okay, we better go to June, Linda.
Yep.
Because we can go through the work groups, and I want to make sure everybody stays on track to that and get some stuff done. Like we've had our little working groups had 3 meetings. We've got a lot of ideas, but we better do it in June if we can, for sure.
Okay. Would you like me to send out an invitation for, say, mid-June, and then we'll see if we'll check on the availability, if that's okay with everybody on the committee?
Linda, can you send out a doodle thing so we can all make sure that we're available?
Yes.
Thank you.
That'd be good. Yeah.
Send that out.
Is everybody else on the committee okay with that? I just see we got a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Margaret's
that sounds
okay.
good. Yeah.
Anne's okay. Carrie, you okay?
Carrie's left the meeting.
Oh, Carrie left. Bev, you okay? Awesome. All right. Sounds good, everyone. Thank you very much, Dawn, and really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for coming.
Yeah, thanks
Until next month. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.